I am a 27-year-old woman, and I lived in Presque, Maine my whole life until last year when I got charged and attacked by something that was neither man nor beast, but definitely something of nightmare material. This happened while I was fishing in the Aroostook River. I'm not into parties, social media, all that girl stuff. When I don't work, I'm usually hiking, traveling, or fishing the river. I grew up fishing the stretch between Ashland and Presque with my dad and my older brother. They both liked to fish late in the day, right up until dark, and that's what stuck with me over the years. Even after they got busy and stopped going as much, I kept the same habit. I'd finish work, grab a quick bite, and head down to the river for a couple hours before sunset. I knew half a dozen bends and gravel bars like the back of my hand. I always felt comfortable out there, and never had a reason not to. Last year, I had issues with sleep apnea, and one day decided to head out before the first light just to see how it was compared to fishing at dusk. I headed out with my old half-ton Chevy a little after 4. Sunrise was supposed to be around 5:15. By the time I turned off the main road toward one of the usual spots, it was still dark. The spot I picked was a little widening off the dirt road. Not an official access, just a place where people have parked for years. From there, a narrow path drops down through the brush to a gravel bar on the inside bend. It's far enough off the road that once you're down there, you can't see any traffic. That's what I liked about it. It felt good out there, without being truly remote. That morning, I was alone out there, just as I'd hoped. I left the truck locked out of habit and started down the path. The drop to the river is maybe a 3-minute walk at a normal pace. I used the headlamp on low beam, just enough not to trip on roots. The woods were quiet. No other human noises at all. Just a few birds and the constant sound of water. When I stepped out of the trees onto the gravel bar, I turned the light off and let my eyes adjust. The bend there is wide. On my side, there's a shelf rock and a stone that slopes gently into the water that only comes up to mid-thigh for the first few yards. Across from me, the bank rises a little sharper with willows and alders tight at the waterline. The river in between us runs maybe 30 or 40 yards across that point, faster toward the far side, slower near my feet. The sky was just light enough now that I could make out shapes, the tree line, the water line, the dark ribbon of current in the middle. My plan was simple. Wade out to just below my knees, work a small crankbait through the deeper slot along the far side, and see if the smallmouth were awake yet. I'd only been standing there a couple of minutes, just long enough to get the feel of the current around my legs, when I noticed it. On the opposite side of the bank, roughly straight across from where I was, something stood between 2 willow clumps. At first, I thought it was another angler. It was upright, tall, and in half-light it just read as someone in the dark, maybe with bulky clothing. I could see the suggestion of shoulders and a head and arms. Nothing clear, just a silhouette. I remember my first thought being annoyance. Somebody had probably beaten me to the bend and decided to stand there in the one spot I usually cast to. I raised my hand and gave a short wave with the rod. Just a friendly, "Hey, I see you" gesture. Most people out there will at least nod back or lift an arm. But this figure didn't move. I stood there for a few more seconds, eyes squinting, trying to see if they were turned toward me or away. The shape seemed to be facing my direction, square to the river, not angled off. But it still didn't do anything. No wave, no head turn, not even a shift in weight. The longer I stared at it, the more wrong it actually started to look to me. The first thing that hit me was the way it held itself. It wasn't standing clean and straight like a guy on a riverbank. It was hunched forward, like its whole upper body was leaning over invisible handlebars. The head sat out in front of the chest, not on top of it. The upper back looked rounded in a way that reminded me more of a big dog stretching than any human posture. Then my eyes adjusted a little more, and I saw the legs. Whatever I was looking at stood on 2 legs, but the proportions were way off. The upper parts, what would have been thighs on a person, looked thick and long. Below the knee, everything seemed to be short and angled backward, like a big dog's hind legs when it stands up and leans on a fence. I've seen guys in waders, guys in insulated bibs, guys in all sorts of gear. None of them had the ankles that far off the ground when they were standing. My brain tried to make sense of what I was looking at. Was this a man in some kind of costume? Some kind of gear that I wasn't familiar with? Then my brain tried to rationalize that it was a bear for a second. A big bear can rear up and look pretty human at a distance, but the legs weren't right for the bear either. The head was the last thing I focused on, but at that distance and in that light, I couldn't see many details. I don't know how long I stood there like an idiot trying to force it into categories, but no category made sense. and I stood there long enough for the unease to catch up with me. "Hey," I called over, because that's what you do when you're trying hard to tuck yourself into being something normal, right? "You out fishing too?" My voice sounded too loud over the water. As soon as I heard it bounce back, I regretted saying anything at all. Because the shape reacted, not in the way that a person would. Something different. It didn't raise a hand or answer me. It didn't shift awkwardly and yell that I was crowding its spot. The head turned a little, like it was listening, like a dog that hears something. Then in one quick motion, it dropped. 1 second, it was upright. The next, it folded forward and down on all four limbs. The sound of it hitting the shallows carried across the river. Heavy splashes in quick succession. It didn't shuffle in place or back away. It launched itself into the water and was now charging towards me. At first, I didn't fully process what I was seeing. I just knew that whatever it was coming for me in a straight line. It made its way through the shallows in long, powerful strides. A big dog splashing in water is one thing. This was that same general motion, but scaled up and packed with a kind of power I felt in my gut. Each time its front legs hit, there was a pause, then a surge, like it was covering more ground than made sense for that amount of space between footfalls. That was the moment I stopped thinking person. No human being closes distance across a rocky, knee-deep stretch of water like that. Not on all fours. Not with that kind of rhythm. I didn't wait to see more. I turned and ran. The gravel bar isn't big. It narrows quickly into the path that leads back to the parking area. In my head, that climb suddenly felt 3 times longer than it really is. I splashed through the first few yards of water toward shore, half stumbling as the current grabbed my lower legs. Once my boots hit dry stone, I didn't look back. I just kept going. The rod banged against my shoulder. My tackle box slapped against my hip. Brush grabbed at my sleeves as I hit the path and started up. The incline is moderate, but in that moment it felt like a mountain. I remember thinking very clearly that I had made a mistake of coming alone, and an even bigger mistake coming before first light. Behind me, over the sound of my boots, my breathing, I could still hear it. The crashes through the water got closer, and then changed. The splashes stopped. What replaced them was a series of heavy, irregular impacts on dirt and rock somewhere down and behind me. There was too much weight in each step for a person. It reminded me of the way cows sound when they get out and run across the road, only this thing was quicker. Whatever it was, it had left the shallows and was now on the same trail that I was using. I don't know how I didn't fall running up there. The path has roots and rocks and little washouts, plenty of things that can catch a boot and make you spiral down. But somehow I stayed upright. I kept my eyes on the strip of lighter ground in front of me and pumped my legs as hard as I could. The only clear thought I remember having was, get to the truck. My Chevy's old. It's a late 90s half-ton with a tired engine and a driver's door that sticks when it's cold. When I broke out of the tree line, I saw it sitting there in the dim light. It looked like the only solid thing in the entire world. I dug my keys out as I ran. I yanked the door open hard enough that it creaked, and I practically threw myself inside. My hand shook as I shoved the key into the ignition. Outside, right on the other side of that thin strip of metal, something hit the truck before I could get it to go. The impact came low and forward on the driver's door, maybe a foot up or so from the bottom. The whole door rang like someone had swung a sledgehammer into it. The panel bowed inward, just enough that I felt it against my leg. The window rattled in the frame, but thank God it didn't shatter. Whatever had hit the truck had done it with a ton of force. The shock of it made me flinch back and look left. That's how I finally saw this thing close up. The first thing I registered was the shoulder. Thick and furred, way too high off the ground for comfort. The fur was dark and matted in places, wet from the river. From the shoulder down, the front limb ran on for at least 4 feet with a distinct elbow joint. Above that, next to the edge of the window, a head pushed itself into view. Not all of it, just enough to scare the crap out of me. The muzzle was heavy and broad. It was too thick for any animal I could think of in that moment. Its lips were pulled back just enough to show the teeth. I think it wanted me to see the teeth. Those teeth weren't what you'd expect on something that eats meat, but there were a lot of them, and they even looked bigger through the smudge on the fog in the glass. The nose was black and wide, wet enough that it left a faint mark when it bumped the window. But the eyes were the worst part to me, the part that still give me nightmares. They sat further back than a dog's, a little deeper under a heavy ridge. It looked at me, not past me, just directly at me. There was no confusion in it. It knew exactly what I was and where I was. All of that only took maybe a few seconds, but to me it felt like forever. I yanked my head back, twisted the key, and stomped on the gas pedal. That finally brought my old V8 to life. Whatever was outside moved away from the door. I felt the pressure come off my leg. I threw the shifter into gear and let the truck start rolling, even as I cranked the wheel to pull away from the creature. For a few seconds, I thought that was it, that I'd scared it enough with the noise and the movement that it would break off, but then it appeared again, this time out in the open on my left, between the tree line and the dirt road. This thing was running parallel to me. At first, it was upright on two legs, shoulders hunched and arms hanging. It covered ground in a way that looked wrong for anything. Too much rise and fall in the upper body. Too much reach in the step. We were only doing maybe 10, 15 miles an hour at that point, but the way it kept pace without any apparent effort made me want to vomit. Seeing that thing in its strange animal-like head run next to me on two legs was just something else, something that my brain couldn't even process. Every couple of seconds, I'd glance left to make sure it wasn't changing direction toward me. Each time I looked, I caught a slightly different part of it. I could see bare skin on the stomach where the fur thinned. I could see the way the muscles in its thighs bunched and released under the hair. The line of its back sloping up from hips to shoulders with that same unnatural hump that I'd seen rise up next to my window. Always the head was turned slightly toward me. Always the eyes on the cab. After maybe 30 yards, it dropped. It folded forward again in the same motion I'd seen on the far bank and went down on all fours. It was like this thing didn't even have to stop to switch position. And that's when it really picked up speed. On four legs, it didn't look anything like a man. Yes, this thing can stand upright like one, but it moves like something out of this world. But you know what? It didn't exactly look like an animal either. It was just a big, dark, heavy thing that belonged on the other side of a fence or in a nightmare, not chasing a pickup on a back road in Maine. I floored it. The truck picked up speed. The road there's narrow and not something you want to fly down, even on a good day, but I didn't care. Out of the corner of my eye, I finally saw it veer off into the brush. But it didn't stumble. It just seemed to decide at some point that I wasn't worth the effort. After a few seconds, it was gone completely. I wasn't able to just move on from this, though. The woods came right up to the place where I lived. Before that day, I had always felt like the woods were a safe haven. After what I'd seen on the river, I couldn't sleep in that house anymore. Every time the sun went down and I caught a glimpse of the woods out of the kitchen window, my stomach tightened. I ended up moving to Bangor. It's not as pretty, and I miss the space, but I sleep better with people and streetlights around me. I didn't share my encounter with the world until now. I did tell my dad and brother what happened because I felt I owed them that much, seeing as we'd spent half our lives together on that river. We were sitting at the kitchen table when I laid it out for them, start to finish. They listened, and they didn't laugh, but I could see the looks they gave each other when they thought I wasn't paying attention. My dad asked a lot of questions about distances and light and how much sleep I'd had before that. My brother kept circling back to bears. I answered everything as straight as I could and told them I knew what a bear looked like. I think they believed I was scared, but I don't think they believed the thing itself. But I did my best to convince them anyway. After we were done talking, I told them to come outside and look at the truck. We walked out to the driveway and I pointed at the massive dent in the driver's door. For a second, neither of them said anything. My dad reached out and ran his hand along the crease. He let out a quiet swear and said there was no way a bear would attack a truck like that. My brother didn't say much at all, but his face changed when he saw how far the panel was pushed in toward where my leg had been. That was the only real moment where I felt the story had landed. I asked them to stay away from the river for a while if they could help it. They nodded and said they'd be careful, but I know them. Every now and then, when the weather's right and the smallmouth are biting, they still head out. So far, nothing's happened to them, thank God. There haven't been any reports of animal attacks in that area for as long as I can remember. There's no reports of livestock torn up or anglers going missing. Nothing that makes the news or local Facebook groups. That's the one thing that lets me hope whatever I saw that morning was just passing through. Or that maybe it just isn't interested in people most of the time. I've told myself for a long time that what happened to me didn't have a name. Calling it anything makes it feel too tidy, too fictional. But people insist on labels, and if I don't give them one, they give me 10. So for the sake of this account, I'll use the word people already know. Not because I like it, but because it's close enough to be useful. This happened to me in late October of 2011. I won't give the exact location, but it was in the upper Midwest, in an area where farmland gives way to wooded drainage land, old logging cuts, and stretches of river bottom that never fully dry out. I was 38 at the time, married, 2 kids, a job that required me to be practical, skeptical, and calm under pressure. I had no interest in monsters. I barely had time for movies. The reason I was out there was work-related, though not officially. A friend of mine owned several acres near an old rail spur that hadn't been used in decades. He'd been losing livestock. He didn't think it was coyotes or even bears. He'd grown up hunting and trapping and knew the difference. Whatever was taking his animals wasn't eating them in a way that made sense. It wasn't wasteful exactly, just deliberate. He asked me to come take a look because I'd helped him track poachers years before. I figured worst case, I'd confirm what he already knew and tell him to call the DNR. Best case, I'd put his mind at ease. I arrived just before dusk. The land sloped downward toward a creek choked with reeds and deadfall. The air had that metallic cold you get before the first hard freeze, the kind that makes your nose burn slightly when you breathe in. Right away, I noticed the quiet. Dead silence. Very selective, like animals were choosing not to make noise. All I could hear was the wind moving through grass and the occasional pop of cooling wood from old fence posts. My friend and I split up. That was mistake number 1. I followed the fence line while he checked the tree line near the creek. About 15 minutes in, I found the calf. It wasn't torn apart, and that's what bothered me the most. There weren't even any drag marks, no scattered animal remains. It was laid on its side, neck broken clearly, ribs opened with precision that reminded me more of a butcher than a predator. Something had fed, but only on certain parts. The rest of this calf was untouched. I crouched there longer than I should have. I remember thinking that if this was a bear, it was the neatest bear I'd ever seen. And it definitely wasn't a coyote, because there was no chew marks. After that, right after that, as soon as I decided something was wrong, those fears were confirmed because I started hearing this breathing that I still can't get out of my head to this day. It was beside me. Close enough that I felt it before I fully processed the sound. It was slow and controlled. Too controlled. Too controlled to be some type of animal. There wasn't any panting or labored breathing. This was deliberate, like someone was trying to be heard. I stood up slowly, already knowing that I shouldn't turn too fast, because I knew that something was there, and I knew that it wasn't a person, but what type of animal it was, I had no idea. All I knew is it sounded big. What I saw was standing half hidden behind the fence, its upper body leaning forward slightly, its head tilted in a way that felt evaluative, curious, but not in an animal way. This beast wasn't charging me or even snarling. It was tall, not in the exaggerated way that people exaggerate, but tall enough that its shoulders were level with the top of the rail of the fence. But its build was wrong. Too much mass in the chest and upper arms, tapering sharply at the waist. The legs bent slightly backward. Not like a human, more like a dog standing on its toes. Maybe even something trying to compromise between the two. Its face is what I avoid thinking about, honestly. Not because it was horrifying, but because it was so expressive. Looking at this beast that looked like a werewolf was definitely terrifying, but the expression in it made it have a quality about it that's far too human for any type of animal. The muzzle was long, but the eyes sat forward, not wide set like a deer, not low like a dog. They were placed for depth perception, for judging distance, for focusing on a single thing. And at the moment, that single thing was me. It didn't bare its teeth. It still didn't even growl. Instead, it shifted its weight, and the fence creaked under the pressure of its hand. And yes, I use the term hand because paw just doesn't fit it. The hand looked more like a raccoon's hand, or even a primate. The fingers were long and jointed and ending in thick nails that curved just enough to be useful. The way it rested them on the wood told me it understood leverage. I realized then that I had not startled it. It had been watching me before I ever even saw the calf. I don't remember taking a step back or even deciding to do it. I just remember my foot hitting uneven ground, and the sound made a feeling far too loud. The creature's ears moved at that sound, rotating, and then I got hit with this horrible smell. People describe it as urine and rot, but this was something more organic in my opinion, like wet hide and iron, like a slaughterhouse floor after it's been washed but not enough. I raised my hands without thinking. It was just instinct. I didn't mean I was surrendering or trying to be defensive. The thing leaned back slightly, as if adjusting its balance, and then, impossibly, it took one step back. That should have been comforting, but honestly it wasn't, because it wasn't retreating. It was more like it was making space that it could use to pounce. Behind me, the grass shifted. I turned my head just enough to take a glance. There was another one. It was smaller than the first one, but just as terrifying. But that one stayed lower, its spine angled, its head level with my chest. It started sniffing the air sharply, and I felt something cold settle in my stomach. It was blocking the only clear path back to the truck. They weren't hunting me, though. They were managing. The first one made a sound then, a short exhale through its nose, almost like a warning breath. The second one froze at the sound. I understood with absolute clarity that running would not end well. I held my hands up, this time definitely surrendering. I said, "I'm leaving. I'll go." But my voice sounded thin even to me. The one in front tilted its head again. The one behind shifted its stance, claws sinking into the dirt. I took one step to the side. They adjusted immediately, mirroring me. They didn't need to rush. They weren't even aggressive. They were more territorial and coordinated than anything else. I backed toward the fence, slowly, keeping both in view as best as I could. My heart was pounding hard enough to blur my vision at the edges. The cold air burned my lungs. When my hand touched the fence post, the taller one reached out and pressed its palm flat against the wood again. That was the final message. This was the boundary. I ducked under the fence, scraping my shoulder, never breaking eye contact, and once I was on the other side, I didn't stop backing away until the grass changed under my feet. Then they moved. They didn't follow me, but they watched me. Both of them standing there perfectly still, silhouettes against the dying light, until I turned and walked away because I knew if I ran, something primal and ugly would wake up behind me. I found my friend 10 minutes later. He took one look at my face and didn't ask questions. We left without another word, and neither of us went back. It's been years since. I've replayed it in my mind endlessly. That restraint that those creatures had. The intelligence on their faces. If those things wanted me dead, I wouldn't be writing this to you right now. If they wanted to scare me, they would have done it differently. What they wanted was control. They wanted distance from me and compliance from me. They didn't want me there. And you know what? They got what they wanted. I don't even camp anymore. I don't wander fence lines at dusk, and when people talk about predators like they're these mindless beasts, I think about the way those eyes measured me, the way the fence became a line instead of an obstacle. Some things don't need to chase you to win. They just need you to understand where you stand, and where you don't. And they like to remind you that even though you think you're on top of the food chain, there's always something out there that can knock you down a peg. And those creatures, what people call Dogman, those are the apex predators. Those are the things that you have to fear going into the forest. Bears and big cats, they can hunt you, but they're still just animals. The things that I saw that day, they were something more. something in between man and beast. I don't know where they came from. I've read a lot of theories about them, whether it's governmental experiments or something else. I don't think I want to know the real answer, because I never want to run into one of those creatures ever again. If you do still go out into the forest, just be careful. And if you hear anything that makes it sound like some kind of monsters behind you, don't run. Don't look back. Just get out of there, slowly and calmly. This story takes place in northwest Arkansas, in the Ozark Mountains, and it begins like a lot of others. A tale of me and my high school buddies. For privacy reasons, we'll use their gamer tags from back then. The actual location of this tale will not be given. It happened back in the late 2006, early 2007 time, when one of the largest snowstorms hit northwest Arkansas. We had 32 inches of snow and 5 inches of ice bearing down on us. There were more than 85 fatalities from that storm alone, and over 500,000 people without power. It was very cold and very wet, but as many teenage boys do, we got bored, and we all got together, deciding to go check around to see if we could help people stuck in the snow. We checked on everyone's families that we knew to see if there was anything we could do for help. After some time of this, and helping a few others out of ditches, we again got bored, and decided to go check on G. Dilly's father, as their house was not in the greatest shape. His dad was kind of a lonely hermit. We sat down and talked to him for a while. He would kind of remind you of Deckard Cain from the Diablo games. It was always a sit down and stay kind of a while thing with him. It was never a fast visit for us boys. However, after a few hours of talking, dark started to set in. The temperature started dropping even more, and as I said earlier, most people were without power. It was very dark. The town looked like something out of an apocalyptic movie, all but abandoned. We tried to get out of the driveway to no avail. After 30 to 45 minutes of trying, we decided it was best to stay there for the night. We called home to tell my family that we were staying there. As the night went on, we started to go stir-crazy just sitting around and doing nothing. So Timbo and I decided to go out for a smoke as Advent and G. Dilly stayed inside. As we smoked, we talked the other two into going down to a place where we all hunted and camped. Now mind you, we all grew up around here. Timbo and I had the most outdoors experience. We were very avid hunters and fishermen. We loved to go camping. Advent and G. Dilly, however, were more of the inside gamer type, but they still knew their way around the woods. We grabbed our rifles and a shotgun from the truck, and we were heading off. We passed one of our many camping spots we used that was on G. Dilly's land. As we walked into the dark and cold through a very thick woods past G. Dilly's house, things started to feel off for us, though. It felt like we were being watched. The whole, now you're the prey thing started setting in. We chalked it up to the bitter cold. We continued farther into the woods. Looking back on it now, we probably should have turned around, not knowing what dangers awaited us in those woods that night. As we passed by our most used campsite, we started to get into uncharted territory. That was the goal, though, to test ourselves against Mother Nature. We kept pushing on through the snow and the roaring, freezing winds. We went into the pitch-black darkness. As we walked, out of nowhere, we heard the sound of breaking branches. We spun around, but nothing was there in the darkness until we heard a low, guttural growl. The sound made the hair on our necks stand up straight, and we felt it in our very cores. This was no longer an adventure, but now it was seemingly a fight for survival. We quickened our pace, but to no avail. We ended up falling down a deep, steep gorge. We tumbled all the way to the very bottom of the gorge. It must have been around 40 feet, but luckily it was covered in snow, and that broke our fall. After we picked ourselves up, we started collecting ourselves and our belongings. We looked up then, and we saw something moving around at the top of the hill above us. It was a big, dark figure moving from tree to tree. As it moved around, we noticed that sometimes it moved on 4 legs, and other times it only moved on 2. We all decided that now we were at a disadvantage to whatever figure was above us on the top of the hill. At that point, with all of us being cold and tired and hurting from the fall, we decided to find somewhere to set up camp. We walked a little ways down the gorge and found a riverbed. We decided to set up camp there. There was a 4-foot drop there. We had laid fallen trees over the top of the riverbed. Then we gathered up evergreens and snow and put them on top of the fallen trees. We placed our fire a couple feet outside of our shelter in the riverbed. We thought that if we built a fire, It may help scare away whatever figure it was that we'd seen up there, and we'd probably stood a better chance with the light from the fire. Then we sat around the fire for a while. We thought everything had calmed down. Then Timbo and I sat inside the shelter. Advent and G. Dilly sat on the opposite sides of the river by the shelter. But we were all still on edge from what we saw. So we talked about it all. At one point, I got up to relieve myself. Timbo decided to get up and add more wood to the fire. I had my back turned away from them all. Suddenly, Timbo was startled by a possum, which had jumped over the woodpile. He shot at it and killed it. As the gunshot rang out, it startled the rest of us. After we realized what happened, we started cracking jokes at Timbo. But then we saw it. Something watching us from the distance. Our laughter quickly faded away to fear. The boys, noticing me staring off behind them, they turned around to face the creature. Now we were face to face with its big red eyes. The thing crouched down by a tree, still easily 5 feet tall, even down like that. It had a large body and a long canine face. It had huge, razor-sharp teeth. At that very moment, it seemed like time stood still. Seconds felt like hours. Total fear hit us all. And then this creature stood up fully, and it towered over all of us. It was well over 7 feet tall. I shouldered my rifle as a roar that seemed to shake the earth filled the air. I fired my .303, hitting it in the chest. Timbo's .30-06 hit its center mass. There was no way this creature could survive this. As the air settled and cleared, we thought we were about to see this thing lying on the ground. But there was nothing but some deep red stains in the ground and tracks leading away from us. We followed those tracks into the darkness, adrenaline coursing through our veins. We chased it, not sure if it was from fear or shock. The idea of it going after someone else or one of us when we weren't prepared made me paranoid to this very day. I don't know what made us go after it for sure, but we did. We went through hills and gorges, following these tracks and red stains. I figured at any moment that monster was going to come lunging at us. As we pushed through the bone-chilling cold, we soon realized we were making one big circle. So, did that mean it was circling back behind us? We really had only one choice. We knew we were never going to catch this thing in the terrain, and there was no open ground for miles. If it was coming back for us, our best option was to dig in and prepare to fight. We put our backs together, eyes in every direction, using the snow and trees for cover. We waited and waited, listening for any sound, looking for any sign of movement, but it never came. We stayed quiet, as much as we all wanted to talk, as much as we all wanted to strategize and try to figure out what the hell it was that we were hunting. Right before the morning sun shone in the sky, we did suddenly hear one long, high-pitched howl, which seemed close, like it was just around the next bend. Like it was telling us we might have won the skirmish, but the battle had yet to come or something like that. Maybe it was just the sound of defeat, or maybe it was angry. We'll never really know. As the sound faded off into the mountains, we all sat there in disbelief until the sun was fully in the sky. Then we stumbled onto an old road and made our way back to G. Dilly's house. We were still in disbelief of what happened that night. Everyone made a full recovery from the fall, but we never did really get over what we saw. Now, still, on occasion, we do talk about it together. And now we've only shared it a few times on the internet. We often wonder whatever happened to the creature. Where did it go? Did it die from its wounds? Were we the only ones out there to see it? Why didn't it finish its hunt? Like I said, we may never know. I might have to get the boys back together at some point. Go back down there someday and see what happens. I honestly think the only reason we're still alive has nothing to do with skill or being brave. I feel it was pure luck. I look at the woods in a different light now, and I watch and listen to everything. I've taught my kids to always expect the unexpected, and just because it's not in our history books doesn't mean it's not out there or it doesn't exist. I know what I saw, and my friends know what they saw. My warning to you is to be careful in the forest. Always pay attention. Never get complacent. Even if it's the woods you know like the back of your hand, it doesn't hurt to always be prepared for anything. My name is Ethan, and I'm a logging and land clearing contractor up in Aroostook County, Maine. I'm 38 years old, and I've been working in the woods in one way or another since I was old enough to use a saw without getting myself killed. Most of my work these days is small to medium private jobs, right-of-way clearing, hazard tree removal along camp roads, and storm cleanup. This particular job was a few miles northeast of Ashland. The land belonged to a family that leased cutting rights to a small timber company. The company I sometimes worked for had the contract to widen and clean up the access road, so loaded trucks and service vehicles could use it year-round without brushing mirrors or dodging leaners. They handed me that piece as a sub. It was late October. I was alone. For a job like this, light widening and taking down marked hazards, I don't usually bring help unless there's a lot of heavy falling near structures or power lines. Out here, it was just trees, ditches, and gravel. I arrived early, just before first light. My headlights picked up the usual. 2 tracks of brown gravel, grass in the center, brush creeping in from both sides. The flag trees were easy enough to pick out with my lights. Orange paint and ribbon on trunks leaning toward the road. Some already dead, some just in the wrong place for the width they wanted. I pulled off on a wide spot about a quarter mile in, nose pointed back the way I'd come. That's a habit. If you get hurt or a tree goes where it shouldn't or the weather turns, it's nice not to have to back a truck out of a tight spot in a hurry. Before I started, I topped off my new 20-inch chainsaw, checked the chain tension, and gave everything a once-over. I put everything onto a small plastic sled that I keep for dragging gear along side roads, grabbed the wedges and axe, and started walking further in, just like I'd done 10,000 times. There was nothing special about the first 15 minutes of this hike. I picked a dead spruce leaning over the ditch for the first tree of the day, set up my notch, made the cutback, and set a wedge when it started to sit. It went where it was supposed to go, down into the brush, away from the road, with the usual crash and rattle of branches. My mind was busy calculating how many trees I could knock down and clean up before lunch. If you asked me then, I would have told you it was shaping up to be a normal, quiet day. I had no reason to think otherwise. The first time I noticed anything was off was right after I finished the 3rd tree. It was a spruce, not huge, but big enough that I had to pay attention. The notch and cutback went just the way they were supposed to, and the tree fell clean into the brush without giving me any trouble. I limbed what I needed to, then shut off the saw and dropped it to have a breather. I sat down, pulled out a sandwich, and started eating. I've always loved being out in the woods, just taking in everything around me. But that's when the hair on the back of my neck went up. I don't know how else to put it. It wasn't a sound I consciously registered at first. It was more like my body decided something wasn't right, and told me before my eyes and ears caught up. I stopped chewing and started actively listening, expecting maybe another truck had come through the gate or a landowner had walked in on foot. But the woods got very quiet. There wasn't any squirrel chatter, no small bird flits. I mean dead quiet. My eyes went to the brush on the far side of the ditch, opposite the tree I'd been cutting. The slope dropped away from the road a little there, then leveled off into a tangle of slash and young firs from an older cut. Between 2 of these fir clumps, maybe 35 yards out, I saw something standing there. At first, my brain slotted it in as a guy in dark clothes. It was upright, shoulders broad, head roughly about where a head should be. It was just standing there, not moving like someone had stopped to watch me work or something like that. That happens sometimes on edges of jobs near houses or camps. People are curious by nature. They wander over and take a look at what you're doing. But there was nothing anywhere close to this stretch, and the longer I looked at that shape, the less it looked like a person. What really threw me off was the posture. It wasn't cleanly upright like a man standing there. It was hunched forward through the shoulders and upper back, like it was built to lean into whatever it was doing. Once I saw that, the legs didn't read right either. They looked too long in the thigh and too short below, with a bend in them that made my mind want to say dog or deer instead of man. The arms hung farther down than they should on any normal human, almost to mid-thigh, maybe a bit lower. I couldn't make out much color in the early light, just dark against dark, but the outline from shoulder to elbow to forearm was thick. Not parka thick, muscle thick. The head bothered me too. It took me a while to make sense of it, but I eventually realized I wasn't looking at a round human head, and it definitely wasn't sitting on top of a collar. It was pushed forward off the shoulders, like the whole skull had been stretched out and set in front of the body instead of balanced over a neck. In that dim light, I couldn't see much of the way in detail. No eyes, no clear facial features, nothing I could swear to later, but the outline was clear enough for me. The front of it came to more of a point than a person's would, with a slope that made me think of a snout. The back of the skull wasn't round either. It tapered down into the neck with a way that reminded me of big dogs that I've owned, only thicker through the base. The ears, or what I took to be ears, sat higher and closer together than a man's. Little dark triangles poking up off the top of the head instead of some round shape on the side. Standing there looking at that silhouette, I remember thinking it looked like somebody had taken the idea of a wolf's head, blown it up a size or two, then dropped it onto a body that was never meant to carry it. I sat there, just dumbfounded, trying to make it into something normal. A bear, maybe? A big black bear standing to sniff the air. That made more sense than a person, given where we were. But I've seen a lot of bears in my time, and this, the way it held itself, the length of the arms, that strange posture, it just didn't match bear. Whatever it was watching me too. You can feel that sometimes, you know. I couldn't see eyes yet, but the way it was squared up toward me, not turned to the side, or casual, that read as focused to me. Worse yet, it was focused at me. The small part of my brain started talking. I was alone. I had no gun, just a chainsaw and hand tools. Even if it was only a bear, being out here between it and thick cover with nothing but a few logging tools wasn't where I wanted to be. I told myself to move, but not to run. Running from anything large with predator instincts is such a bad plan. So I decided to do what I tell other people to do when they get spooked in the woods. Retreat toward my truck, slow and steady. First, I picked up the saw and set it in the sled with the cans. No way was I gonna leave that thing out there. Then I grabbed the rest of my gear and started shoving everything back onto the sled with more haste than care. The truck was maybe 300 or 400 yards back down the road, around a shallow bend. On a normal day, that wasn't much of a walk, but right then it might as well have been a mile. And then I got moving. For the first 20 yards, 30 yards, nothing changed. That thing just stood there, half hidden in the slash and the young firs, watching me. Every few steps I'd stop and look again, hoping it would have turned away or dropped down or resolved into a stump that I'd misjudged. It never did. By the time I'd made it back to where I dropped the second tree, my breathing had picked up. I tried to keep it under control, but adrenaline doesn't care much what you want. I could feel my heartbeat in my throat. That's when that thing finally moved. And I'll tell you this, it didn't shuffle like a bear, dropping to all fours and waddling off. No, it stepped once forward on two legs, slow at first, like it was making up its mind about something. That step told me two things very clearly. One, it was tall, well over my height, maybe 8 feet or better. And two, it wasn't bluffing about being interested in me. I kept walking backward, not breaking eye contact with this thing. I raised my hands up and yelled for it to get out of there. Now that would send most bears on their way if they weren't already too wound up. This thing cocked its head slightly at the sound, like it had never heard anything like me before. And then it dropped. 1 second it was upright. The next it folded down onto all fours in a smooth, ugly motion that looked far too practiced. The front end came down, long arms reaching, hands or paws, I still don't know what to call them, spreading in the leaf litter. The hindquarters settled behind. The legs bent backwards in that wrong angle again. In that posture, with its back humped, I guessed it was still almost as tall as I am when standing up straight. The shoulders especially stood out. It had a distinct hump just behind its neck. I've never seen anything like it before or after. And then that damn thing started charging at me. I did what any idiot with no better option would do. I finally turned and ran for the truck in earnest. With all the advice about not running from predators, all the calm, logical things I know about wildlife and tell people, well, they evaporated as soon as I heard it hit the ditch, splashing through shallow water and rotten leaves. The sound of it coming up on the road behind me, claws or nails scraping on rock, lit something primal in my head that didn't care about logic. I ran as hard as I could with my gear, still unwilling to give up the sled. And I can tell you something else. Not even halfway to the bend where I'd parked, I started feeling every extra pound I've put on over the years. But I had one clear thought. I was not going to outrun whatever that thing was. I'm not built for speed in the best of times, and this thing clearly was. What I did have was my equipment. I've never put too much thought into using an axe or a saw as weapons before. They're tools, but in that moment, they were the only things with teeth that I had. It only took me a moment to decide after that, and that's when I went for the saw. I cut to the side, yanked the sled around, and grabbed the saw out of it by the top handle, almost going down when the weight and my own momentum fought each other. I caught my balance, jammed the rear handle under my right arm, and yanked the starter cord like my life depended on it, because as far as my body was concerned, it did. The saw coughed once, nearly caught, and died. On the second pull, it roared to life. The sound was a shock, even to me after so many years wearing muffs whenever I used it. In the enclosed space of that narrow road with the trees closing in on two sides, it bounced back at me, loud and ugly. I flipped the throttle lock and buried my finger, bringing the chain up to full speed. The bar shook in my hands, 20 inches of steel and teeth spinning faster than my eyes could track. I spun around and brought it up between me and the charging creature, feet planted as best as I could on the gravel. I didn't think about technique or what would happen if it hit. All I knew was if that thing really came for me, it was going to have to go through the saw to get to me. That way, I would at least hurt it and give myself a better chance of escaping afterwards. It came into view a heartbeat later, barreling up the road, water and debris flying from under its limbs. Up close, it was so much worse than the silhouette. The chest and shoulders looked strong and heavy and were covered in fur, sitting over a narrower waist that was mostly exposed skin. The front limbs were not only long, but also thick with corded muscle, and ended in heavy, blunt digits that looked more like fingers than anything else. The fur was dark, maybe black, maybe dark brown. I couldn't tell in that light. The head was forward and low as it ran, ears pinned back, jaws open just enough that I saw way too many teeth. And those teeth were too long for that mouth. It closed to maybe 20 yards before doing something I still think about at night. It saw the saw and dug in hard, claws biting into the gravel as it skidded to a full stop, stone and grit spraying out from under it. For a second, it just stood there on all fours, chest heaving visibly, staring straight at me. Then it slowly cocked its head to one side like it was weighing its options and rose back up onto two legs. Seeing that thing rise up to its full height, right in front of me, was the scariest thing I've ever experienced in my life, hands down. Panic took over. I screamed at it, I think. I don't remember what I said. Probably nothing that made sense. I just roared and held that saw like a shield, making as much ruckus as I possibly could in a desperate last-ditch attempt to scare it away. It didn't flinch from the noise the way normal animals do. Instead, it started advancing again, a few slow, careful steps forward until it got around to 15 feet. It was close enough that I could see hairs moving on its chest with each breath, close enough that if I had to push off hard, it would have been on me before I could even take a step back. Every part of me wanted to let go of the saw, to turn and run. That's all my body was screaming to do anyway. Drop the weight and try to get away. The only reason I didn't was because some stubborn corner of my brain stepped in and pointed out the obvious. The saw had stopped it. That noise and those teeth were the only things that had put even a little doubt in whatever passed for its mind. If running was what prey did, then running wasn't the right move. So instead of giving ground, I did the last thing I ever thought I'd do in a situation like that. I started walking towards it. Just these steady, deliberate steps, waving the saw out in front of me like a sword. That seemed to throw it off completely. I don't think it ever had something challenge it before. It had been creeping forward like it owned the road and everything on it, but as soon as I took that first step towards it instead of away, it froze. Its whole body went still except for its chest, which was still working hard. Then it lowered its head a touch and let out a growl that I felt more than heard even through the chainsaw. That chain noise sat on top of it, but underneath, I could feel that sound in my own sternum. Its mouth opened wider and its teeth came on full display. Up close, the face was worse than anything my imagination had been feeding me from further back. The muzzle was shorter and heavier than a wolf's, with thick lips that peeled back just enough to fully expose the front row of teeth. Those weren't the teeth of some half-starved canine. They were long, thick, and crowded in there, yellow toward the base. The nose was too broad and wet-looking. The eyes set deeper than a wolf's, set heavy under ridges that made its stare feel almost human. Everything from its forehead down to its lower jaw was bare, just dark gray skin, no hint of fur. There was a rough scar tissue along one side of the snout, like it had been hurt or burned before and healed badly. I damn near pissed myself looking at that thing from not even 15 feet away. But still I didn't stop. This was the only thing that might save my life. I kept putting one foot in front of the other just enough that I could see I was willing to hurt it if it came to that. I kept the bar pointed at its chest. If it came, I was going to bury that chain in whatever part of it I could reach and hope pain was still a language that it understood. For a couple of seconds, we were stuck in this demented standoff. Me moving towards it with a screaming saw. It standing tall over me, shoulders hunched, lips twitching, making that awful rumble. Then, little by little, it started to lose its nerve. Or maybe just its interest in me. It eased one foot back, then the other, but never taking its eyes off me. It was like it finally decided that I wasn't worth it. That the risk was too much. When I matched its movements with one more step forward, it finally gave up the straight-on posture. It turned its shoulders, keeping me in view over one side, and backed off towards the ditch in a crab sort of sidestep. But the growling never stopped. It got lower, more like a warning than a promise. At the edge of the road, it hesitated one last time, then dropped back down to all fours in that same ugly practiced motion. Once it was on the ground again, the decision seemed made. It spun, kicked off and ran. Really ran this time, down into the brush. In 3 or 4 bounds, it was off the road and out of sight. A couple of branches rustled and snapped, and then it was just gone. I kept the saw up and stood there in the middle of the road for what felt like a long time, but was probably only less than a minute or so. My arms shook from the strain. My hands were starting to go numb from vibration. I had a death grip on the handle. Sweat was pouring off me. I stared at the spot where it had vanished and waited for it to come charging back out. When I finally moved, I didn't bother with the sled. When I finally moved, I left the cans and tools where they were, turned the saw so the bar pointed up the road toward the truck, and started walking. I couldn't run. I didn't trust myself not to trip, but I went as fast as I could go without eating gravel. The chain was still spinning half bore. If it decided to try me again, even from behind, I wanted that thing between us. I wanted to know that even if it attacked, I still had a fighting chance. About halfway back, some tiny sane part of my mind piped up and told me how stupid I must look. A grown man hoofing it down a logging road with a screaming saw in his hands. But the rest of me answered that thought with something simple. Better an idiot and alive than smart and torn to pieces on that road. I made it back to the truck without seeing it again. The sudden quiet I felt when I finally shut off the saw hit me almost as hard as the noise had. My ears were ringing. My heart was still thumping so hard I could feel it in my throat. I got in the truck, started it, and eased it out of there faster than I usually drive down those roads, watching the brush and the mirrors the whole way. Once I had a couple of bars of cell service, I pulled into a turnout and sat there with the truck idling, trying to get my story straight, trying to calm my nerves. I knew 2 things for sure. I sure as hell wasn't going back in there. And I couldn't tell anybody what I'd actually seen if I wanted to keep working in the industry, or even be considered sane. You can't just call a paying client and say you walked off a job because something that looked like a werewolf stood you off on a logging road. You can't call a warden and tell him a 2-legged wolf man charged you and expect anything but a note next to your name forever. But you can say you had a run-in with a bad bear. So that's what I did. I called the client first and told them I'd had what I thought was a big black bear come in on me while I was cutting, that it had charged close enough that I'd had to use the saw to scare it off, and that I wasn't comfortable working on that property. The guy swore a little, asked if I was hurt, and told me not to worry about it. He'd talk to the landowner and figure out whether they wanted to shut that piece down or send a bigger crew. After I hung up with him, I called the local warden service number and left a message. I stuck to the same version. Bear encounter on a job, animal not backing off to yelling, only broke when I lit the saw and pushed it. I said they might want to note it in case anyone else has the call from the same area. At no point in either call did I say the word werewolf or wolfman or anything like that. I'd never said those words out loud in my life up to that day, and I wasn't about to start with a guy who carries a badge. What I've told you here, the height, the posture, the head, the way it ran on all fours but was also comfortable on two, and the way it sized me up before it decided that I wasn't worth the trouble, all of that still lives with me. I don't have a name for it that I like. I don't care much what anyone on the internet wants to call it. Dogman doesn't seem right. It could be considered a wolfman or a werewolf, but even that just makes me think of some Hollywood bullcrap. I just know I've spent my whole life in the woods, and I've never seen anything like it before or since. If you ever find yourself near Ashland, Maine, think twice before you head into the woods unarmed, because there's something out there that is more deadly than any animal that you've ever faced in your entire life.